Okay, everyone, we're going to get started here. A big welcome and thank you for coming and attending our webinar on comparing the DJI M300 RTK versus the M30T and M30. We appreciate you spending a little time with us. One of the things I'll mention up front is that any questions you have, please put them in the question box instead of the chat box, and then we'll answer them either at the appropriate time or we'll get to all of them at the end of the webinar. My name is Greg King, and I'm one of our enterprise account managers here at Multicopter Warehouse. I cover the Eastern United States, and then I'm happy to be joined also with Ryan Carter, who's the enterprise account manager covering the West United States. Say hi, Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
And a few things about Multicopter Warehouse. For those of you who might not do business with us currently, we're a large enterprise level dealer for DJI and Autel robotics, as well as Teledyne FLIR and other lines. And we specialize mostly in public safety, which of course would be fire departments, police departments, search and rescue, EMS, sheriff's departments, and then in inspection. So for cell towers and for solar panels and all kinds of gas and pipeline inspection. And then we have another division that handles the mapping and surveying, LiDAR, all of that. And then we also are one of the few dealers that have two authorized DJI repair technicians. And we're based out of Colorado, so we're kind of in a middle of the country. And we have somebody, both account managers and service guys, available from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time. So that's a little something about us. And what we're going to do today, and I'm going to turn this over to Ryan, we're going to go through the Matrice 300 RTK and talk about its features and benefits and show the specs and kind of do a deep dive in it. And then we're going to do the exact same thing on the 30, and then we're going to do a comparison of the two and kind of talk about which one would be better for which situation, and then we'll handle the questions at the end.
Perfect. Yeah. So like Greg mentioned, we'll start here by getting into the Matrice 300 RTK. This is DJI's flagship drone, so kind of their top tier enterprise option. That's going to allow you to do a ton of different stuff with a single aircraft. So just kind of running through the specs, there's a multiple payload options, which we're going to go through some of those. The max flight time with this the 300 RTK is a 55-minute flight time. That's going to be with no payload. So that's not something you'll typically be doing. You'll typically at least have a single payload on there, and typical flight time with the single payload, depending on the which one it is and the weight of it, it's right around 41 to 43 minutes. Now this one is capable of doing a dual downward gimbal. So if you did want to mount a one of like the H20T and a spotlight to be able to utilize the dual gimbal setup, then that's something that's doable with this platform. And then it has an IP of 55, which means that it can handle Greg, you might be able to tell me a little bit more of this, but it can handle not a downpour and rain, but it can definitely handle some water and dust.
And it'll do some misting and you can bring it back when it starts to rain. But when we talk about the M30, we'll see that one has a lot more weathering for it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And then with this aircraft, you can do the multiple pilot modes. So if you are doing a larger search and rescue operation or a long inspection route where you're going to be going down maybe different towers and you won't be able to keep the aircraft within line of sight, then you would be able to get a secondary remote and have a second pilot set up down the road to be able to pass the drone off to when it becomes out of sight. Some of the other modes that you can do with the two remotes will be having one control the gimbal, one control the aircraft, and then there's also a coach mode where if you were trying to train someone on how to fly, then the trainer, if you will be able to take over control of the aircraft at any given time. So that's kind of convenient for the different style missions that you might be flying with the M300. Now with this aircraft, it is equipped with full 360 obstacle avoidance, so 6 directional obstacle avoidance sensors. You're going to have IR and visible sensors in each direction. Now, these will pick up 95% of objects. Some things like power lines, very small twigs that sit on top of trees that those sensors don't pick up as well. That's where the CSM radar will come into play. So that's an additional item that you can purchase for the M300 that sits atop the aircraft, and it's a circular scanner that will actually pick up stuff on a millimeter level. So stuff like power lines, stray branches that are kind of hanging off, you would be able to pick those up. So it's something that we highly recommend for this system. You do get crash protection with all enterprise drones. They come included with a enterprise basic plan, which would be 2 full replacements. But if you can eliminate having to use those by adding stuff like the CSM radar, it makes a huge difference. Going into some of the payloads that are offered on the M300, one of the main ones is going to be the H20 series. So the H20 comes in now 3 different options. It was just 2 with the H20, H20T. They now have the H20N available as well. We recently did a webinar on that, which you can actually find on our YouTube page if you care to learn a little bit more about that H20N and how it compares to the others. But essentially what you get with an H20 camera is a 23 times optical zoom. You can then do 200 times digital zoom, or a hybrid zoom, if you will. So once you pass that 23 times optical, it does start to get a little grainy, but from our experience, because of the sensor size on it, it will still remain a pretty clear image where you'd still be able to make out a person, a license plate. You'd be able to read something from a great distance away. They're also equipped with a 12 megapixel wide angle camera and then the laser rangefinder. Now that'll be standard on all of the H20s. Once you get into the H20T, you're going to add that thermal camera that's going to be a 640 by 512. And then with the H20N, it's also going to add an additional thermal camera to allow for you to have a zoom feature with that thermal. And like I said, the H20N, it does differ a little bit from the H20T in terms of the standard sensors. They're set up to be a nighttime sensor with the Starlight camera. So I would definitely recommend checking out our webinar if you wanted to learn a little bit more about the differences between those. And then the FLIR TZ20R is going to be the other thermal option that we carry for the M300 RTK. So this one is equipped with 2 FLIR boson cameras, so it is radiometric data that you're able to collect with it, 20 times zoom capability with those thermal cameras. And then you would typically, especially when used in an inspection public safety setting, would be putting it on a dual gimbal with something like the H20 to be able to obtain RGB imagery as well, since this is just thermal camera. It does have a pretty good ingress protection on it as well that can handle about the same as what the M300 itself can. And then you're able to process these photos using FLIR tools.
And one thing to mention, Ryan, if you go back one slide,
Mm-hmm.
So the H20 and the H20T have the best RGB cameras on them of the series. And then when you get to the H20N, you have the very good thermal camera, the wide angle and the zoom. But the RGB cameras are the Starlight sensors, which are very good and very low light, as low as, like half a moon. But during the day, they're not as good as the H20 or the H20T. So what some people do is, if they want the absolute highest quality zoom and wide angle in RGB, and they want the highest quality thermal, they'll use the dual gimbal that Ryan was talking about, and they'll buy an H20, which will give them the best cameras for RGB, and then they'll buy the FLIR on the next slide.
Yep.
Do those two together, and then you have the best of both worlds.
Right. And that's then the price point for putting the FLIR TZ20R and H20 actually still comes a little bit lower than what you see with the H20T and H20N. Now the downside to doing that kind of setup would be you're taking up all the ports. You're not able to add a light or anything else really to that downward side. So if you did want to utilize a spotlight or something like that, the H20T or H20N would probably still be the best option, since you get it all in one. But this is still a comparable setup if you're really just looking for thermal and zoom capabilities. Now the Zenmuse P1 is going to be the photogrammetry payload for the Matrice 300. So it's a 45 megapixel full frame sensor. And this one is designed, like I said, specifically for photogrammetry. So it has a global mechanical shutter, and then it's able to do features like time sync and smart oblique capture, which is going to basically allow for you to be the most efficient when you're collecting this information. With the smart oblique capture, you're able to run multiple style missions all in one, rather than, like, for example, with a Phantom 4 RTK, if you wanted to do a nadir and oblique style mission, you would be doing it in 2 separate flights, whereas the P1 would be able to actually collect all that data in a single flight. Now that comes included with the 35 millimeter lens. There are the 24 and 50 millimeter lens options available, but yeah, it will come included with that 35 millimeter lens. And then staying on the survey mapping side, another payload is going to be the Zenmuse L1. So this was DJI's first LiDAR system that they came out with. If anyone is familiar with LiDAR, then you would kind of know that in the past, to be able to get into LiDAR would be roughly $50,000 to $100,000 to just get the LiDAR system, which you'd then be putting on, you know, a $13,000 to $20,000 drone. They have this one now available for right around, I think 14,000 is the price point on this right now.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a lot of money, but compared to what else is out there and available, this has definitely been one that has been very popular within the survey mapping industry because of the data that you're able to collect with it. It has a good IP rating. You're able to collect up to 240,000 points per second, and then you will get a live view of the point cloud in real time. So even for a public safety scenario, when they did release this, they actually had an example of it being used for search and rescue, where they were sending the L1 out, collecting using the live point cloud to find a route into a lost person that they had located using the thermal camera. So these can all be integrated with one another one way or another. So that's going to be the L1 that's compatible. So some of the features that's offered with some of these payloads, the H20 is going to have, since that's designed mostly for public safety inspection, one of the features is going to be a pinpoint. So with the laser rangefinder, what you're easily able to do once you find your subject, or if in an inspection setting, if you wanted to mark a certain point where you wanted to come back to and you need to make changes, or there need to be repairs done, then with a single tap you can easily mark that location in your map view. It's going to give you a latitude, longitude coordinate, which you're then able to label, put a name to. There's different color codings that you can add to it to help dissect that information for your team. But that's going to be a feature available with the H20 and H20 or H20 series gimbal.
And that gives the location of the subject, not the drone.
Correct. Yeah. So you'll have a crosshair in the middle of the screen that once you'll direct that exactly where you need it to be, then using the laser rangefinder marks the point on your screen, not where the drone is. You will get information about where the drone is and its location, but that's not what this is. This is going to be to actually mark a point on the ground. And then one of the other cool features is going to be the smart track. So if you're familiar with DJI Consumer Series, where they have the follow me mode and the drones that will actually autonomously follow behind you, this is similar to that in a much safer setting. So with the camera being such a high-powered zoom, it's able to actually stay in one place and follow a subject indefinitely. So we have followed subjects about just under half a mile, I'd say, where we're able to keep them in frame, read the license plate from a car, and it also has predictive tracking. So you are able to manually pilot the aircraft once you are locked in on a subject to help it stay in frame. So for instance, if you're flying too low and it gets behind a building, then it's going to try its best to do a predictive tracking with it. But if there's nowhere for the car to come out or the subject to come out on the other side, then it's obviously going to lose it. So that's when you would probably want to take control of the aircraft and fly it into position to keep that subject in frame.
And at no point will the drone automatically as a car or something starts getting further away and it's adjusting the zoom and the gimbal, at no point will the drone actually start following the car. The operator would have to instigate that.
It would only be operator if it moves, correct? Yep. And then this one's more so for the inspection setting, but an AI spot check is when you're going to be using waypoints to fly and set up a shot. So for instance, they have the little diagram here with the cell tower, where if we were inspecting the cell tower and we flew up to a certain height and we needed to look at one of the sides at a very specific point, then we would do that one time manually, get that in frame, set that waypoint, go to our next point, do the same thing, so on and so forth. And then from then forward, we'd be able to automate that flight where it'll fly to point 1, zoom into the exact spot that you had, go to point 2, so on and so forth. So this just really makes it super efficient when doing routine inspections, where you won't have to go and actually try and find that one little spot that you needed to double check on. You'll just rerun the mission, and it's going to go collect that same exact data. So a pretty cool feature here on the H20 series. So getting into now the M30 and M30T. Now this one, unlike the M300, it's going to have a built-in payload. So this is not something that you're able to integrate LiDAR, a photogrammetry payload, or third-party payloads onto this aircraft. It's going to be either the H20, or I'm sorry, the M30 or the M30T. And so with the M30, it's going to be very similar to what we see with the H20, where you're going to have and actually we'll have a slide here, but we'll go into cameras a little bit. So I'll start off by just kind of going over the aircraft. The max flight time with this one, 41 minutes. So very similar to what we see with the M300 with the single payload. And then as we mentioned a little bit earlier, the IP rating on this is much higher. So this one can actually withstand a torrential downpour. And I think Greg might have a little bit more to add to that.
Yeah, with that IP rating, the first number is always having to do with particles. So whether it's dust or a piece of sand or a small bug. But the more important one is the second one, and that 5 means that this drone can be splashed water at a pretty good rate all around it for up to 10 minutes without any of that water affecting anything. And we've done several demos here where we've had local police departments that have wanted to come down, and they waited until we had a rainy day and they wanted to come down and see it fly, and we did that. And of course the camera is what's always going to get wet, but if you're high enough and you're pointing your gimbal down, then you can't operate in that light rain.
And that's pretty huge, especially for the public safety side, because I mean you really can't control when you're going to need to be putting this drone up to do a search and rescue operation or to help with a live fire or whatever the case may be. So to have that freedom of being able to pretty much fly whenever and in whatever weather conditions, and that's a huge improvement with this M30. Similar to what we see with the M300, you do have those same multiple pilot modes. So either the passover mode, where you can take over full control once the drone goes out of line of sight, the gimbal aircraft operator mode, or the coach mode with that. Now, currently the M30 does have 360 obstacle avoidance built in. So just like the M300, 6-directional RGB and infrared sensors that's going to prevent it from hitting stuff. They don't currently have that same CSM radar available for this. Now that's something I don't know for sure if they're coming out with. There is the same style setup on top for it to come out and be mounted on there. So I'm assuming that's in the plans, but I can't say that for sure. I think it took about 6 to 8 months for the CSM radar for the M300 to get released. So we're thinking that's probably going to be the same point, but don't hold me to that. And then with this M30, they did come out with the new DJI RC Plus. So we'll kind of have a slide to compare the two controllers between the DJI Enterprise Smart Controller and the DJI RC Plus. But as of right now, the RC Plus is only compatible with the M30, with plans to make it compatible with the M300 in the future. And then going into some of those camera features, so with the standard M30, you're going to have the 16 times optical zoom that you can go up to a 200 times hybrid zoom with that as well. Now, compared to the H20, I will say that we do notice a little bit more grain as we get closer to that 200 point with the M30. Since it only has the 16 times optical rather than the 23 times optical, once we reach that 200 times, it does become very hard to read license plates. You'd still be able to identify subjects, know that it's a person, know that it's a car or a bike or whatever that, but the smaller details are going to be kind of harder to pick up the more you're zooming in. Similar to the H20, you also have a 24 millimeter wide angle lens. And then with the thermal version, so the M30T is when you integrate that 640 by 512 thermal camera. And then also we'll have a laser rangefinder. So essentially what we have here is a dumbed down version of the H20 and H20T. Essentially, you have a little bit less optical zoom, and outside of that, it's really going to be the same camera because you're going to have the same thermal resolution, the same specs on the laser rangefinder, and the same wide angle camera.
Well, and also there's a difference with the FPV camera. On this one is a special low light sensor. Since it'll be used a lot with public safety, they made it to where if you do get caught and things are getting dark and the regular camera isn't able to see as much as the FPV, you have the FPV to be able to fly home in pretty darkness and be able to see.
And then getting into some of the smart features that are available with the M30 series. Some of these we went over with the H20, like the smart track. So being able to select a moving subject and have it autonomously follow that while the aircraft stays stationary. So the camera and gimbal are moving, the aircraft might be yawing on its axis, but it doesn't move from the position height that it's at unless the operator does so. And then it also will have route and mission planning. So this is not considered a photogrammetry drone. So it does not have mechanical shutter. It's not going to give you the accuracy that you'd want for a survey mapping mission. But a lot of times you don't need that accuracy. You just need to be able to create a little orthomosaic maybe for accident crime scene reconstruction where you don't need centimeter level accuracy, you need within a couple inches accuracy, which this would provide. So that's going to be a whole tab within the Pilot 2 app where you're able to set that route and mission to be able to do so. And then similar to the M300 with H20, the pinpoint feature. So since it has that laser rangefinder, if you were using it for a search and rescue operation and you found the heat signature of your subject, you'd be able to use that laser rangefinder to pinpoint and mark that location, which you'd be able to get the latitude, longitude to the teams on the ground. And then this drone is compatible with Flight Hub 2. The M300 will be as well. Flight Hub 2 is going to be a fleet management software that DJI has where you're able to manage your fleet of drones, you're able to mission plan, you're able to actually see live views from the drones. We haven't had a ton of interest in the Flight Hub 2 quite yet, but I do think that it's something that's going to get bigger as they grow that. And then we went over the dual operator modes, being able to do passover, coach, or gimbal aircraft operator. And then this drone did come out with what's called the DJI dock. Now we'll talk a little bit about the DJI dock, but right now it is extremely hard to use the DJI dock in North America or America really with the current laws that are set up. So DJI dock is intended to be a storage, charging, updating, flight planning dock that the drone will actually autonomously fly and land into, as well as you'd be able to use the Flight Hub 2 and stuff like that to send it on its mission. So I mean, remotely you'd be able to execute missions with the M30, which right now is illegal. You have to be on site with a controller in hand, keeping the drone within visual line of sight at all times. So right now, if you did want to go with the DJI dock, you would still need a pilot there to watch it. So there's not really any point, but we're hoping that here in the next year or two, we get some regulations changed that will kind of allows us to use this a little bit more.
We had a question before we look at some of the comparing the specs of the 300 and the 30 together. Someone's asking if there's a public address system available for the M32. And there is, right now, there's just one. It's called SciTop, and it's a combination speaker and floodlight. Since we only have the one mount on top, it's a combination as opposed to a light only or a broadcast speaker. And those are available.
So kind of getting into our comparisons between the two platforms here. Now the M300 RTK, what I'm really going to highlight is the 300 RTK with H20 series, since that's going to be the most compatible and or comparable payload to what the M30 is offering. But as we kind of mentioned and went over, the H20 series is going to have that 23 times optical zoom versus the 16 times optical zoom on the M30. They both will give you that 200 times digital or hybrid zoom. And the one difference there is the fact that with the H20, we do feel that even when you maximize that 200 times digital, you're still getting a very quality image where it's not going to look super grainy. And I mean, you'll be able to tell a little bit, but not nearly as much as what you'll see with the M30 when you maximize it. That is, I mean, once you're in that 100, 150 times hybrid zoom, I think both cameras will give you a very readable, where if you're trying to make out a license plate or you're trying to be able to read a sign or whatever the case may be, you'd be able to do so in that range. Then they're both going to have that 12 megapixel wide angle camera, both going to be equipped with that 640 by 512 thermal camera, and then they're both going to have that laser rangefinder with the 3 to 1200 meter range. And then the biggest difference between those cameras are the IP ratings, with the M30 being a lot more or a little bit more weatherproof than the M300 with H20. But yeah, those are our main differences. Now, in terms of flight performance, the flight time being in that 41-minute range for the M30, 43 to 45 minutes with the M300 with the H20 series camera on there. Now, again, with the M300 being so customizable, you can add the light, you can even add the radar to the top, which would add weight to it, which would probably put that down more in the 38-minute range or so. Something to always consider with flight time too is altitude that you're flying. We are located in Colorado, so we're a mile high to start with, so we get probably 10% shaved off the top, 5 to 10% shaved off the top just from the get-go. And then in terms of obstacle avoidance, both have that 360 built-in obstacle avoidance, with the M300 being the only drone right now available to add the CSM radar to. They're both going to have that multiple pilot mode, and then also, I mean, one of the biggest differences is the multiple payload options with the M300. So being able to have the M300 kind of be an all-in-one solution for you, where if you were planning on getting into thermal, high optical zoom, and then also wanted to be able to offer photogrammetry or LiDAR or something like that, the M300 might be the best bet for you, because of the fact that you're able to not have to get multiple drones to do these things, but just the multiple payloads to add to the single drone. Whereas the M30 will just have the integrated camera on it. Now, both of these systems will be able to do the hot swap on the batteries. So if you're doing a long mission flight, or if you're doing a search and rescue and you need to get the drone back up as soon as possible, then you'll take out one, because each of these aircrafts you'll need 2 flight batteries to be able to operate. So you'll take out the first battery, replace it, take out the second battery, replace it, and you'll be in the air within seconds, rather than having to actually power down, recycle. This makes a huge difference with the L1 camera. So if you were doing LiDAR at all, the LiDAR needs to warm up and the IMU needs to calibrate. That takes about 10 to 15 minutes sometimes. With the hot swap, you're eliminating that every single time you're coming back to swap out batteries. So that's a huge
and even
plus.
though they're both rapid redeployment from using the hot swappable batteries like Ryan's explaining, one big difference is that initial deployment. With the M300, you have to take that out of the case, you have to turn it upside down, and you have to put the landing gear on. And it can take a few minutes. And then, of course, then you could redeploy it with the hot swappable. Whereas with the M30 and the M30T, there is no landing gear. So all you do is fold out the propellers like you would on some of the smaller drones, and you're in the air in a minute or so. So that's a big difference, and especially with public safety.
Yeah, and yeah, like Greg was saying, if you're familiar with, I know a lot of you are probably familiar with the Mavic 2 Enterprise series. I would put the M30 in terms of deployment time more so compared to the Mavic 2 Enterprise than the M300, whereas the M300 does require a little bit more setup, a little bit more time to get it ready, since you have to attach the landing gear, attach the camera, attach a radar, whatever you need to do. It's going to save you time to get in the air with that M30. Absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that. And then some of those smart features. So with the H20 series and the M30, they're both going to have that smart track, being able to follow your subject while the drone stays stationary. They're both going to have that pinpoint to be able to mark a location and get that latitude, longitude information to teams on the ground. They're both going to have that mission route planning option to be able to set an area and go and capture it. Now with the M300, since you can get an actual photogrammetry camera for it, then you are able to do high accuracy mapping missions when used with the DRTK2 base station. And now that I mentioned the DRTK2 base station, it is also compatible with the M30. But as I mentioned earlier, the M30, M30T is not designed to be a high accuracy photogrammetry system. So while it is compatible with that RTK system, it's still not going to provide you with that accuracy that you need. And then the big difference between them is the AI spot check will only be available with the H20 series, and the DJI dock is only going to be available with the M30 series. So if you were wanting to more so utilize the intelligent inspection flight modes, the H20 would be kind of have that edge there. And then if autonomous flights become legal here in the next couple of years and that becomes something that you want to do, then the DJI dock would make a huge difference there. But as I kind of mentioned, it's not really something that's feasible right now for teams in the United States. Now, the difference between those controllers, the M300 uses what's called the DJI Enterprise Smart Controller. It's going to have a built-in battery on that remote, which will last right around the 2.5 hours. Now, the WB37 is a pretty standardized battery that DJI uses for the DJI base station. It uses it for the old M200 remotes, the Ascendants, the Crystal Skies. I think what else? But the Enterprise Smart Controller will take that same battery. When you have that in there as well, it's going to give you around 4.5 hours. You see the operating temperature there of around -4 degrees to 104 degrees, and then the brightness on it right around 1000 nit. The size is right around a 5.5-inch display. So this is one thing that we hear a little bit of complaints about, is the size of that smart controller. It's right around the same, maybe a little bit bigger than a typical iPhone these days, but right around that same size. And
the screen, yeah.
For the screen, correct, yeah. And for the most part, it does get the job done, but having just a little bit bigger of a screen, I think, has been huge, like what we see with the DJI RC Plus. So jumping over to that one's going to have an internal battery life of 3 hours. With that external battery added in, you'll get up to 6 hours. It does have a higher operating temperature range, so it can withstand a little bit higher temperatures. And then that brightness does jump up to the 1200 nit rather than 1000. But with that 7-inch display, I mean, just that little bit extra really makes a difference, being able to get a clear image, especially when you're utilizing this in real time. So if you're going out and collecting data and you're coming back and you're viewing that data in your computer, it doesn't really matter what remote you have. But when used in a public safety, search and rescue, live fire, where in real time you need to have accurate information and be able to detect different things on the screen, that RC Plus has been phenomenal for that.
Well, and there's a couple other things that people have mentioned that they really like about it after they've purchased one. One is that instead of just having the 2 roller dials for doing the gimbal and zoom, now you have 3. So you can have 2 that are doing the gimbal in the different directions, and then the other one you can have do the zoom. And then they've also changed how you can do the zoom. You can do it normally with the zoom camera activated and just use the dial and it will zoom in. Or if you go to the wide angle camera and you use the dial, you'll see the box get smaller and smaller, and you can place it on what you want. And then when you hit the one button, then it zooms in automatically. And then the other thing is that it has very nice 6 soft buttons, 3 on either side, that they'll change according to where you are in the application, and it makes it easier than having to always go and touch on the screen.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite features is the preset buttons. People always think they're custom buttons, but they are not, and it was for good reason, because they are set up to be the most efficient as possible when changing through the cameras. Like Greg mentioned, if you're trying to set up a zoom shot with your wide angle camera, very easy to do so, and then switch to that zoom camera. So you're not having to jump back and forth for the different, because a lot of times with the H20, we'll see people zoom all the way in, zoom all the way back out to try and to see where they are. But by just switching through the cameras with those easy pre-selected buttons, then makes a huge difference. Now we have a question here asking if the RC Plus has an HDMI output for live streaming, and the answer is yes. So they're both going to have an HDMI out on the controller. Where you would be able to connect that to an external monitor. You'd be able to connect that to, we actually haven't tested this, but to see if you'd be able to connect it to a transmitter. Now, what you'll also have in the remote, built into the DJI Pilot app, is cloud streaming services. So if you connect with a 4G dongle, or if you have Wi-Fi that you can connect to, then you are able to have that streamed to a cloud service where any of your team would be able to pick up that feed and kind of go from there. But that has kind of reached the end of the comparison here, and we did want to leave some time for some additional questions if anyone had any. I know that
Now we're not being able to see that.
we'll talk a little bit about price point too while we're here. And so the M30T starts at $13,999. That's going to be with a set of batteries. You'll get a hard case with that. You're going to get that RC Plus, and then you're also going to get a battery charging station. So with that battery charging station, it does have 3 modes set up for it. It's going to have a mode to be able to do fully charged, so the standard mode. There's a ready to fly mode. So the ready to fly mode is going to be when it charges each sequence of batteries to 90% before moving on to the next one. So just the fastest way to get the most amount of batteries in a ready to fly mode, if you will, enough battery to get a solid flight in. And then it's going to have a storage mode. So the storage mode will charge them to 50% and then leave them. The M300, that one, the aircraft, what is it? The aircraft starts at 11.
Without a payload.
11,399. And then with the H20, you're right around the $3,800, and then for the H20T around 11 $1,000, around 12 for the H20N. So realistically, with the M300 with an H20T, you know, you're probably in the $25,000 to $30,000 range if you add extra batteries and stuff like that. Now that aircraft does also come with the hard case, the DJI Enterprise Smart Controller, and then you're also going to be, you will also have the battery station. Now with that battery station, it does not have the 3 different charge modes. It's going to charge them all to 100%. Now, if you leave the batteries in the charging case for the M300, then after the time set in the battery settings for discharge time, they will discharge in the battery case after said time. So one thing that we do get asked here from time to time is, you know, my batteries have been sitting in the charging case for a week or two. I pull them out and they're not charged, and it's because they were charged. They then discharged themselves in the case because they knew that they were just sitting on charge, and they don't want to be stored at 100% because that's what causes swelling and whatnot. So we do have a question here about the M30T batteries. Those are going for $329 each. Again, you do need 2 of those to be able to fly with at any given time.
And we have another question about the battery cases. Besides what Ryan was talking about, they want to know, well, the one big difference is the M300 battery case. You can leave all 8 batteries and the 3 controller batteries in it when you close it and actually store them in there and carry it that way. The M30 case, you open up and it will charge all the batteries, but you have to take the batteries out to be able to close it. It's a lot smaller case. But on the other hand, the M30 case will hold 6 batteries, 2 in the drone and then 4 extra ones. So if you were to fill up that case with 8 batteries, you don't have to figure out how to carry an extra 2 batteries.
Yep.
Is that our last question?
I think we have answered all the questions. If you guys do have additional questions, or we will be uploading this webinar to our YouTube page. So to anyone watching on YouTube right now, email us as well. But for anyone on the webinar as well, here is our contact information. If you did have any follow-up questions, or if there's anything that we could help you out with in general. If you are local and wanted to stop by the store to see some of these units, we do have demo units for each of these. And we can also definitely set up a demo for you if you'd like to see them in action. But yeah, we appreciate you guys coming out, taking the time. One last check to make sure we addressed everyone.
Yeah, and be sure and check out our YouTube channel and also on our website for a lot of our other webinars, because everything gets taped and gets put up there immediately. So with that, we appreciate you coming, and we look forward to seeing you again in the near future.